Thank you very much, and welcome, everybody. Let me echo what Terry says, and that is that I am delighted that everybody's here. And I could almost say I'm honored, but I think I have to acknowledge that what brings you here is Beethoven and not me. That's what brings me here, and I expect that there are people in the room who, in many ways, know Beethoven's Ninth Symphony better than I do. So that I hope that much of what we do is share opinions and feelings and thoughts about music. I'm not the world's expert, but I'm interested. You're interested. We have that in common. Let me echo also what Terry said a minute ago about the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, what we're doing here is a matter for us. If other people at some later point want to spy on us, and to see highlights of the most fun we had in these 2 days, if we had any, that's fine. But I'm not acting for television, and I'm not concerned about those people in the future. Well, I am concerned. Welcome to those people out there in TV land. But I think what we must do is do what we came here to do, and if it has repercussions, if it has waves that affect other people elsewhere in the world, so much the better. But I don't want to change anything on that account. A particular interest for me is making the world safe for the kind of music that I love. And I teach a course that includes Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and in that course I spend a lot of my time, in a way, trying to convince young people that this is a sort of music that can change their lives, trying to convince them of how lucky they are to be alive on a planet that has music like this on it, and trying to create for the future an audience of music lovers. If I fall into that mode, just stop me, because I don't think you all need any convincing. You are here. You probably do know the piece. So my interest in these next couple of days in thinking about this Ninth Symphony is not to show you things that you probably already know, but maybe to raise some questions. What's particularly interesting for me is what the Ninth Symphony is like to us, as compared to what the Ninth Symphony was like for the people who heard it for the first time. After all, Beethoven didn't write his Ninth Symphony for music critics, musicologists, music historians, and great people of high culture. He wrote his symphony for people whom he knew and whom he hoped would buy a ticket to his concert so he could make some money. He would undoubtedly be delighted that his symphony has become maybe the touchstone of classical music. So one of the things we'll talk about is what you might call historical parallax. That is, you know how things look different depending on the distance you are from them. If we hung a circle, a 15-foot circle of light bulbs, spaced a foot apart, say, and hung them on top of the Prudential Center in Boston and looked at them from Cambridge, it would look like a light. And then if we hung it on top of the Holyoke Center instead, it would look like a circle of lights. And if we were standing this close to it, it would look like a light and another light here and another light there. It's the same object, but our position in relation to it changes it a lot. And the same is true, I think, for this symphony. I mean, this is, I think I can say this in this room. You know how the categories of universities work? People say universities, or they say Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, or they say Harvard and Yale, or they say Harvard. And by Harvard is meant not only the acme, the greatest of all universities, but sort of the shorthand representation of what's meant by a great research university. In a way, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, it seems to me, has become the shorthand word for all sorts of highbrow classical music. You say classical music, or you say symphonies, or you say this piece. So in a way, it has become a kind of an icon. One of the great pieces, it's up on a pedestal, we worship it in a way, and in a way you could say that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony has sort of become the world's national anthem. I don't know if you agree about that, but I think you might, and I think Mr. Beethoven would be pleased. The great Titanic, most wonderful moment of the tune comes after a lot of other things, and Beethoven brings it back by by just keeping things up in the air, making you raise your eyebrows, saying, something's coming. Well, we know that tune, don't we? How many people here have listened to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? How many people have heard a live performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? How many have heard more than one live performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? Well, come up here and I'll sit out there. Let me just remind you of what an icon that thing has become, and not only in our own time, but what does Leonard Bernstein choose to conduct at the moment the Berlin Wall comes down? The Ninth Symphony. What does the Boston Symphony Orchestra decide to perform on the Boston Common in honor of Seiji Ozawa's 25th year as conductor? What piece gets performed on New Year's Eve in Japan hundreds of times all over the country? It's a great icon in Japan. Maybe some of you know that. Do you know that the Sony company, when collaborating with the Philips company to generate this new technology called the compact disc, they were trying to figure out how big should it be. We'd like it to be small, but not too small. Sony said, fine, it can be any size you want, provided that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony can fit on one side of it. And that's why the modern CD is the size it is. Who can do anything after Beethoven? Said one of Beethoven's contemporaries just after his death. And it's worried people, but also has inspired, or you might say, has given ideas that composers have borrowed from Beethoven many other times. There are lots of ways it's influential. We know of other symphonies that include a chorus. This is the first time that a chorus and solo voices are part of a symphony, but we know of other symphonies that do that. Mahler, Bruckner, Berlioz have all written after Beethoven symphonies that include a chorus. We know that there are other symphonies that quote earlier movements of the symphony in the last movement, which is one of the features of this symphony, that he brings back ideas from earlier movements, which is not characteristic of symphonies in general. And then later composers do that. I don't know if anybody knows Berlioz's Harold in Italy, where he does exactly the same trick at the beginning of his last movement. And composers have tried to give that sort of universal cosmic quality to the beginnings of their pieces, I think, on the model of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. We've committed ourselves to 2 long days of talk about a symphony that would have been over if we'd started it at the beginning of our session today. What it really says is that so much of what is in music is so condensed, so unspeakable in words, that in order to try to unpack it, it takes us a very, 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 very long time. It may be worth doing. It's not necessarily because it improves our appreciation. I think that the warm feeling I get in the pit of my stomach when I listen to that piece is maybe the same and maybe different from the warm feeling you get in the pit of your stomach from listening to that or some other piece. But each of those feelings, some might call it aesthetic appreciation, some might call it some sort of a sense of beauty. Those feelings have exactly the same value, yours and mine and hers. Nobody can take that away from me. And that's one of the things that we actually can't touch when we do this analytical stuff about music. That's good news, but it's also bad news. We can never really quite say what the kernel is. but we can try to describe it. And what we do when we do this is try to understand what it is that we're feeling and thinking as we go along. And when we stop and think, oh, notice that that was all a nice smooth tune, and this was going a lot of different places, and then became another smooth tune and so forth. Essentially, I hope you can see that the overall psychology of this whole long movement is the same psychology as that little short folk tune that Beethoven composed, but just on a much larger scale. So again, one of the themes of our talks here is the distance from which you view an object changes the way you think about it and perceive it and talk about it.